everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fortean Photography. I'm Emily Wayland, photographer and designer for the Singular Fortean Society.
And I'm Tobias Wayland, the Singular Fortean Society's head writer and editor.
In today's episode, we are going to be discussing the Myakka Skunk Ape and the photographs associated with that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of pretty interesting photographs to come out of that event. But before we really get into the analysis of those, I think we should probably start with a little bit of background.
Yep.
Because some pretty talented and famous investigators are already attached to this case. So if you guys don't mind, we actually already wrote a article on this for the Singular Fortean Society. And so having done that research, I've got a lot of it printed out in front of me. And so, if you see me looking down, I'm consulting my notes. This was a pretty research intensive one. So the Myakka, say that right? Myakka?
No, I'm not sure.
I know, right?
Myakka.
We're going with Myakka.
We looked it up before we filmed this.
Sure. So Myakka it is. We had to pick one, and that's the one we picked. We stand by that choice. So the Myakka Skunk Ape photographs go all the way back to mid-February of 2001, when a number of newspapers in the Myakka River area of Sarasota County in Florida began publishing a couple of images submitted by an anonymous woman. So this woman had delivered a letter along with the images, and basically the story she told was of photographing this creature after it had made repeated intrusions into her backyard. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read a little bit of this letter that she had submitted. Enclosed, please find some pictures I took. My husband thinks it is an orangutan. Is someone missing an orangutan? It is in a crouching position in the middle of standing up from where it was sitting. It froze as soon as the flash went off. I heard the orangutan walk off into the brushes. I guess that's Florida for brush. Or bushes. One of the two. I judge it as being about 6.5 to 7 feet tall. As soon as I realized how close it was, I got back to the house. It had an awful smell that lasted well after it had left my yard. The orangutan was making deep whoomp noises. For 2 nights prior, it had been taking apples that my daughter brought down from up north off our back porch. It only came back one more night after that and took some apples that my husband left out in order to get a better look at it. We got a dog back there now, and as far as I can tell, it hasn't been back. I don't want any fuss or people with guns traipsing around behind our house. At the very least, this animal belongs in a place like Busch Gardens. Why haven't people been told that an animal this size is loose? Please look after the situation. I don't want my backyard to turn into someone else's circus. And so, I mean, this was big news, of course, at least in cryptozoological circles. And, it didn't take very long for, Lauren Coleman, arguably the most famous living cryptozoologist, to become involved. And so Lauren had the photographs analyzed, and it was found that the creature captured on film had some structural similarities to an orangutan, interestingly enough. Although, as Lauren has said, he doesn't necessarily believe that it was one for a number of reasons that we can touch on later. And so what he'd actually written about it in his blog was, he said, concurrent with my thinking, Tony Shoihama, a biologist with the Canadian Wildlife Service, pointed out some features on a good photograph of an orangutan by Denise McQuillan. This is not to say the Myakka photographs are of an orangutan, but it certainly assists in identifying features that are found on a known anthropoid that appears to exist on this one too. So again, he's pointing out similarities, structural similarities in the physical makeup of whatever was in these photographs with an existing, large primate species, the adorable orangutan. I think they're adorable.
I think they're too.
Good. So, now this wasn't all of the work that Lauren had done here. He also asked David Bittner of Pixel Workshop to examine the photographs, and Bittner was able to confidently declare that they hadn't been tampered with. So, you know, we've covered this in other Fortean photographies where, you know, somebody has been able to determine that the photograph itself wasn't tampered with after the photograph was taken. That doesn't mean that the object represented wasn't
staged.
Right, in some way. It just means that the photograph itself wasn't manipulated. And so that certainly seems to be the case here. Now, Lauren ended up, you know, believing somewhat in the veracity of this lady's story, and that it was, you know, in all likelihood, a photograph of, you know, a potentially anomalous, you know, large ape, we'll say, which, you know, is pretty fascinating stuff, but not everybody agreed with him. So, fellow cryptozoologist Bobby Short was not a fan of the Myakka Skunk Ape photographs, to say the least. So she used her website, Bigfoot Encounters, as a platform to express her disbelief. And I'm going to read a little bit of what she wrote there. So Short said, more than 3 veteran Sasquatch investigators in Florida have investigated and determined that the Myakka photograph was a masked individual in a baggy leg costume and deemed a hoax. The imagination of creative cryptozoology writers, I assume that is a dig at Lauren, ran away with themselves on this one. It's wishful thinking, wholly a misidentification, a hoax, call it what you like. There is no mysterious Myakka creature in Florida. There are no fossil records of apes in Florida. Apes are quadrupeds, while the Bigfoot, aka Sasquatch or skunk ape, is a biped, classifying it as a homin, not a pongid. Even if there were feral or escaped apes from primate facilities or circuses managing to live off the fruitless Everglades, they are not related to Florida's hominoid, upright walking, hairy creature, she wrote. And, you know, she's making a lot of assumptions there. I'll just say right off the bat. You know, not the least of which is that the Bigfoot or skunk ape phenomena, well, the range of phenomena and associated phenomena represent an unidentified species of relatively mundane ape. You know, I think guys like Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin might have a little something to say about that, as would many other researchers. So, you know, the idea that missing fossil records and other evidence that she would expect to find isn't there doesn't disprove that these photographs are of something truly anomalous, frankly.
Right.
All it shows is that maybe, well, in my opinion, what it shows is that maybe she should re-examine her assumptions about what exactly Bigfoot is and what it represents, insofar as that goes. Again, I'm not making any declarations here necessarily as far as what the photograph actually captured. All I'm saying is, you know, maybe Ms. Short should follow the evidence we have instead of her assumptions on what you know, a Bigfoot is supposed to be.
Because a fossil record is pretty irrelevant when it comes to the paranormal.
Well, it absolutely is, and honestly, just because there are tons of gaps in the fossil record, and that isn't to say that they won't be filled eventually, but our knowledge of that is far from complete.
Right.
So, I mean, who's to say that Bigfoot isn't in undiscovered primate species, and, you know, they find fossils eventually? I wouldn't rule that out necessarily, but yeah, I mean, fossil records missing wouldn't and doesn't concern me a whole heck of a lot, honestly. So, in continuing, she goes on to say that in addition, a May 2006 letter from Mitsuko Choden, primate specialist in Japan, revealed the Myakka ape is a costume familiar to them in assorted colors with plastic teeth molded in the fashion of the great apes. She went on to say the subject in the Myakka photograph expressed no body, arm, or leg definition that would lend itself to the great apes. So, I mean, I've seen the photographs. I would strongly disagree.
And I
with
also
that.
think that like the ape's behind like shrubbery and fronds of plants, so you can't
Right.
see the entire thing anyways.
A lot of it is concealed. Yeah.
Right, so I don't think that necessarily is a completely valid analysis.
No, I would completely agree, and we'll get into this a little bit in just a minute, but yeah, it seems dismissive, and often in paranormal investigation, you'll have someone come up with a completely mundane, rational explanation for something that is 1000% wrong. And just because you can think of a possible explanation for something doesn't mean that that's the actual explanation.
Right.
And I think that could be what's happening here. They can speculate all they like, but the evidence doesn't necessarily support that conclusion.
Right.
So I'll just finish up this background by saying David Barksey, who was with the Sarasota Animal Control, actually went on later to say that he'd gone on expeditions in Myakka State Park, and he said he'd been driven out of those woods by something before, like something unexplained, something terrifying, something like a skunk ape. And so he was one of those public officials, and the longer you do paranormal investigation, the more of these people you'll meet. But he was one of those public employees who will say like, hey, now not a lot of guys will talk about this, but believe me, in private, we agree there's something going on. And that's what he said. He said, and this is verbatim, he said, police may laugh in public, but whisper in private. So there are a few interesting things here. You've got existing folklore based off of eyewitness reports in this area, combined, and from credible people, mind you, combined with photographic evidence. Well, that makes for a fascinating episode of Fortean photography.
Right.
And last but not least here, I really should mention that the website Cryptomundo did their own analysis, and their opinion was that this photograph was a hoax, and what they had compared it to was a Bigfoot display found in our very own Wisconsin Dells, Ripley's Believe It or Not. Now, as what I'm sure will come as no surprise to anybody watching this, I was a big fan of that place because I grew up around here. Like my family lives in the Madison, Wisconsin area. We're only like an hour away from the Wisconsin Dells. We would go there every summer, and I always insisted that we go to Ripley's Believe It or Not because I was a weird kid and that place is amazing. And I remember that Bigfoot exhibit. It was super cool. So basically what it was it had like a recreated Pacific Northwest forest. And then it had this statue kind of set back in there, but you couldn't see the statue itself directly. Instead, they had a mirror set up on the other side. And so what you would do is you would look in one spot and you wouldn't be able to see it. But if you shifted your perception slightly, then suddenly it would like seemingly appear out of nowhere because of this mirror. It was amazing. I loved it so much. But it doesn't look like the Myakka Skunk Ape photograph.
And I have not been there, surprisingly, but I looked at it. It doesn't look anything like it. So I don't understand how they can make such a declaration.
It seems a little dismissive, but you know, I think in this field people are allowed to agree to disagree.
Yep.
And I think that's what I would be most comfortable doing here, frankly. So, but you know, why don't you take us through some of your analysis?
Sure. So first off, I'd like to talk about witness credibility a little bit.
Okay.
The woman did submit her letter anonymously, and so you do a lot of investigations and speaking with witnesses, and we've said more than once, witnesses who are anonymous and just want to get their story out are pretty credible. Like she's not trying to seek any attention.
Right.
She just has this thing in her yard. She refers to it even as an orangutan. She doesn't make any assumptions. And it's just like, hey, is Busch Gardens missing an orangutan? So it seems pretty credible to me from the witness standpoint.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially because at no point does she call it a skunk ape.
Yep.
She keeps referring to it as an orangutan.
Yep.
Which seems pretty reasonable given the circumstances. You know, and you know, remember this was 2001, so the internet was very new. And while people did perform hoaxes, like that was a thing people did, of course, there were still practical jokers. It wasn't as common as it was, and when it would happen, oftentimes, pretty much always, eventually somebody would come forward because the practical joker wanted their credit. It was a lot of it was about attention, and that never happened here. So you know, if you do think it was a hoax, I think you have to wonder what they got out of it and why they never came forward. So yeah. I don't find this witness incredible, I will say. And I don't see her being anonymous as a mark against her. Much like Emily said, I think it's a mark in her favor, considering.
And she was very thorough with her approach to this letter, too. She did stakeouts to be sure what the creature was. And I think that shows a little bit more effort in, I feel, and this is a speculation, and just from hearing some stories, but a lot of times if somebody is hoaxing something, they're not going to be very thorough and cover all their bases necessarily. But she's, you know, she's in her yard, she's trying to figure this out so she can best tell the authorities what she saw.
Sure.
So I think that is something to consider too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if it was a hoax, you know, whoever wrote that letter knows how to write a very realistic account, I think, of an interaction with something like this.
And it, obviously, whoever hoax, if it was a hoax, they're not getting anything from it by being anonymous.
Right.
And I touched on that before, but
sure,
just it's something to consider, especially.
Of course.
So I don't think that this we touched on it before, but this creature does not look like an orangutan. It's mostly black.
Yep, it resembles it. I would describe it as orangutan adjacent.
Like you can make some comparisons, but when you look at it, you're like, that's not an orangutan.
Right.
So that's something to consider. And she used a compact flash on a camera when she was doing this, and you can see for me, this is the most compelling evidence of these photographs, is that the creature has eye shine.
Yeah, why don't you, actually, if you don't mind, could you sort of explain why the flash is relevant here?
Yes.
Particularly?
So think about when you shine a flash in somebody's eyes, and with us, we get red eye. We are not nocturnal creatures, whereas we have a cat, and if you shine a light on her eyes are very dilated, and it reflects the light, but doesn't necessarily. It's called eye shine.
Right.
And her pupils are so dilated, you can almost see like the back of her eyes.
You're talking about our cat.
Our cat, yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that is what we see in this creature's eyes, is nocturnal eye shine.
Yeah. So the light is literally hitting the back of its eyes and reflecting back out at us.
And it's not just an iris, it's not just the pupil, it's the entire eye, which is what happens with eye shine of nocturnal creatures. Most apes are not nocturnal.
Right.
So that's interesting to think about. if this is a skunk ape, is it nocturnal? It was out at night, to be fair.
Right, and that's really interesting. So, I mean, could it represent an undiscovered species of nocturnal ape? Or you know, a nocturnal primate species? If I'm accidentally misusing ape or primate, I apologize for that. But yeah, no, that's really interesting point.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, honestly, could you explain maybe a little bit more about that flash and how it might have affected other aspects?
Yes, so when she took the image, she said the creature froze.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two things to look at here. Some people would, you know, if it was squatting and sat up as it responded to her flash, you know, one might argue, where's the motion blur?
Right.
Flash freezes motion.
Okay.
We've discussed this in previous episodes.
Yeah.
But also, I think that if you look at these photographs, it's definitely reacting to the bright light.
Mm-hmm.
And if you shine a light in deer's eyes at night, they freeze.
Sure.
Which is what it is doing. So it would.
That's a prey response, though.
Well, if I get a bright light in my eyes, I'm like, whoa, what's happening?
That's a good point. Yeah, fair enough. So, okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window.
Yes.
So there's a scene when the killer is coming into his apartment and he's crippled, just for context for people who might have not seen this. But to literally defend himself for a little bit there, he just flashes the guy in the face with his camera flashes, and the guy's just like, whoa, what is, you know, and that's right. What this creature is doing in this picture.
Fair enough.
And so we know this woman was a senior citizen, and assuming she did not change her stance or use a tripod, it doesn't move very much, but it moves in the manner which she described.
The creature?
Yes.
Okay. Is it possible that it's her perspective that's shifting and not
it's
the
possible, but we have to remember that there was likely not a lot of movement on her part, especially if she was staking out.
Well, and now, did she take the photos sequentially, like very quickly?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I think it was probably like a few seconds in between, because if you're thinking about an old late 90s, early 2000 compact film camera, the flash would go off, and then you would need to the film would need to advance. It kind of resets the flash, and then flashes again. So it's not exactly like a burst like you can on your phones now, where you hold it down and it just takes it every millisecond, but it definitely was sequential.
What are we talking here? Like 5 seconds, 10 seconds?
Maybe like 5 or slightly less than that.
So about 5
3
seconds,
to 5 seconds
between photographs. Okay. Well, you know, if it's surprised and it's not moving very much, I could see that.
Well, if you've had a flash in your face,
right,
you still kind of see some of that residual.
Sure, you can be dazzled.
Right. So,
okay.
you can see different colors after a flash goes off, which could have been happening here with the creature.
Delve too far into speculating what the creature was thinking, but I understand your point.
But from a photographer's standpoint, knowing how subjects interact, that's kind of why I bring that up.
Fair enough.
I also bothered to look on Google.
Of course you did.
And looked for ape suits, and there is not really anything like it. I know that they stated it looked like something in Japan, but think about the early 2000s as well.
Try not to.
Internet shopping was not what it was now. You know, she would have had to know, if it was a hoax, they'd have to know somebody in Hollywood.
Sure.
Or something like that, because I don't think even Etsy, which people can make really impressive costumes on there, could make something with that. And how is it not, how do you replicate eye shine like that in a costume, you know?
It would be tough. I think if it was a costume, it was handmade. And I think that, now Sarasota, Florida, is that where circuses go in the wintertime?
Maybe.
It might be. I know a lot of, especially back then, when you still had traveling circuses, I know they're not really a thing anymore.
Down there.
Right.
I don't know if it's Sarasota, but it's down there.
Sure. And so I think that there would be people potentially present in Florida capable of making a pretty good costume. Maybe an orangutan could escape from a circus. And if we are mistaken, and if it is of something mundane or it was hoaxed, I think it would be one of those two things, either an orangutan escaped from a circus, or maybe somebody associated with the circus who is a talented costume maker. You know, maybe they do makeup effects for, you know, the freak show or whatever. Could have come up with something like that. If that's what happened, I don't particularly believe that necessarily, but if we're wrong about our suspicions, then I think those would be the likeliest possibilities.
Right. So, I mean, that's pretty much our analysis of the photograph. I have a couple statements here from a couple colleagues of ours.
Great, you want to read it?
Yeah, so Josh of Creeped Out says, well, my gut says authentic experience considering what the lady told the police about someone's orangutan being loose and that she wanted to be anonymous. If it was a hoax, wouldn't you want fame or for seeing something like that? The only thing that may scream hoax to me is that you can't see the body that well. It is concealed by the plant. But considering it looks like the facial expressions change, I don't know if that's enough to discredit it possibly being real.
Yeah, fair enough. Looks like we have one here from Adam Benedict from the Pine Barrens Institute. Do you want me to read that one?
Yes.
Fantastic. So Adam, good friend of ours, just like Josh, good friend of the Singular Fortean Society, said, honestly, I try and look for anything and everything in that photo to find fakery, but my gut really feels it's real in some way. The face is what does it for me. It's got some sort of eye shine, changing facial expressions, and it appears to have some weight to it. If it's a hoax, it's one of the best hoax suits I've seen. So, you know, these are friends and colleagues of ours, and I take their opinion pretty seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think my opinion on this photograph aligns very much with their opinion on it and their conclusions. And I think we pretty much stated that during our analysis.
Of course. Yeah, so, you know, despite what I said before, which was my attempt to be thorough, because we want to be thorough and try to approach all of the possibilities. I don't think that this was hoaxed. I don't think that we have enough evidence for me to definitively say that it was a costume or anything. The evidence doesn't necessarily seem to point that way. So my opinion is that this is an authentic photograph of something. What that might be is anybody's guess.
Right. I think it's a skunk ape or an orangutan.
Or an escaped orangutan. Okay, fair enough. So that's the Myakka Skunk Ape, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We hope that you enjoyed season 1 of Fortean Photography. Going forward, Fortean Photography is going to be a Singular Fortean Society member exclusive show. So if you're interested in seeing more of those or becoming a member of the society, you can sign up through patreon.com/singularfortean, and we hope to see you there.
Yeah, and you can always find us on social media. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, and our handle is Singular Fortean. I'll put the links down in the description below. Of course, we have our website, singularfortean.com. So we hope you enjoyed season 1, and if you consider joining the society, we hope to see you next time. So thank you for watching.
And of course, you know, stay tuned to the Singular Fortean Network on YouTube. We will continue to release our repository of unusual stories videos, and you know, other episodes of video projects that we're working on, as well as sneak peeks and updates and all other manner of exciting stuff. So we hope to see you again, and thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone.